Hi, this is Carrie Goetz with Strategicom, and we're going to talk today about procurement and IT procurement. To let you know a little bit about us, we are both a services and a solutions company. So we have services to help people with technology direction, strategic planning, figuring out IT and technical debt, where you need to go with that, doing ICT and intelligent building design or data center infrastructure design. And then we also have a solutions side if you're looking for voice over IP systems, data center space, modular data centers built on premise, all kinds of different solutions there. So I encourage you to check us out. We launched CTO as a service last year. Allows companies to buy technology services a day a week, a day a month, 3 days a month, or through a procurement cycle, or even just on a small project, and then the services stop. So this allows you really to have any of those services as a service. Thank you for listening today. And to let you know a little bit about me, all of these places in green are places I've been around the globe, either doing projects or working with end users. There's also a podcast series that I do that is part of an outreach project, and this really addresses careers for women, trades, and veterans in tech. And the idea is to bring about knowledge that you don't have to write code to be in tech. There's a million jobs, and we interview people in all of those jobs. So anything from construction to the cloud. Feel free to share that out to Girl Scout troops, junior college folks, junior high folks, anybody considering a career in tech. I think it's important that people understand the depth and breadth of what's out there in tech, and that you don't necessarily have to write code or be good at math to be in tech. So anyway, we interview some really great people in the industry. I hope you'll enjoy it. But now on to our technology. When we talk about technology procurement magic, there's some things that maybe you don't know that happen behind the scenes, maybe some things that you might be aware of, but might not know how to use to your advantage. And so we're going to talk about all of those. And when we talk about technology procurement itself, we're talking about literally any tech that you buy, whether it's a service like cloud, and that could be hybrid, multi-cloud, private cloud, data center space where your data really resides, whether it's in your location or somewhere else. The hardware and software we normally think of when we talk about procuring tech, and then your voice systems, whether you're using voice over IP or you're using an in-house system or some combination. All of the security and cybersecurity, which has gotten to be really sort of in the limelight these days, especially with work from home, making sure that all of your systems and your data that your employees carry all over the place is safe. And then technology services themselves. So your technology planning, your white space design, your intelligent buildings design, networking design, that kind of thing. And then telco services, if you're adding additional services, Zoom might be one of those. And even consultants' time. And so we'll talk about some different things to look for. Now, from a procurement standpoint, we want to make sure that we hire suppliers that are going to bring good business value to us. And we want to really earmark that value over price when we do our evaluations of who's supporting us. And so supplier relationship management becomes a big part of that. Some companies have a separate procurement department that does that. Some companies have certain people that they work with and just trust them to make the best decisions from them. Some people like to keep them honest and do multiple RFQ cycles. And so we'll talk about some of those as we move forward. Also, there's other things that, maybe you're doing business with one company and they're acquired by another company and you didn't really want to do business with that other company. So sometimes those things change and we have to look for different business partners and other people that we want to work with. And we have to understand too that for most of the products we buy, or the tangible widget things, that most companies are really working on just-in-time manufacturing. Our distribution houses are working on just-in-time stocking. And so we have to really find those business partners and set up those relationships with those manufacturers to make sure that we can give them a heads up when we're going to need a whole bunch of stock, or have them help us out with logistics if we're doing projects in multiple countries, to make sure that that stock actually gets to all of those countries where we need it to. And anything that we do also needs to be part of our business contingency and continuity planning. We want to make sure that we start that process very early so that as we move towards those scenarios, we don't have those big surprises. And we want to align our business strategy with our supply chains. We want to be better consumers so that they can be better suppliers. And that'll help us prioritizing distribution, logistics, asset management. And all the way through this, we expect our suppliers to be very agile and flexible, but we also have to give ourselves the time to be able to do that ourselves. And granted, I know that, sometimes I just have to have it today. There's kind of no other way around that. And that certainly is going to happen. But we want that to be the exception rather than the norm. And as we think of all of these things too, throughout technology, we have to realize everything has a life cycle. And we want to make sure that as we start planning on different projects, we start planning on different technology, we want to know what the exit strategy is, because that's equally as important as the entrance strategy or getting in to start with. And so as we start gathering all of this information, we rely on different things. So employees are certainly one. Sometimes employees want to stack their resume and put in things that, it looks great for them, but it might not be the best solution for the company. We hope that's the exception rather than the rule, but we certainly know that that happens. We also rely on vendors, and sometimes our vendors are going to push for the latest and greatest technology that might not be the best solution for us. And I think really as consumers, it's on us to kind of challenge them and make sure that we're getting the right solution. Consultants can certainly help you there and help you keep your vendors honest. That's, if you need that, it's a very inexpensive way to bring somebody on that's going to be that second pair of eyes or to be that devil's advocate for some of this technology, especially if you're buying something new that you don't understand, like cloud or cloud services. Disinterested third parties can be consultants, but the idea here is that they have zero interest whatsoever in the solution that you procure and that you buy. And so we offer disinterested third-party services where we really work just through helping people or helping companies through the RFI cycles and understanding, who all can be there. And interested third parties might be, say you're using a consulting firm and they're picking out your desktops for you, or they're picking out your cable plan, or they're picking out the software solution that they're going to implement for you. And that's not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but understand what their sphere of influence might be and bringing those solutions to bear. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Peers are a great example when you talk to other people in the industry, what they've picked, what their solutions are. But you also want to understand that whatever that solution is, make sure that it's exactly what you need it to be for as well. And then networks and associations are really, really great ways just to figure out. You can get to several peers at once through those. Procurement teams, if you bring them along with you in this journey, they get to be much better at procuring technology. I spoke at an IT procurement conference not long ago, and they all said, everything, all you said is really well and good, but we don't understand what we're procuring when it comes to tech. And so having them involved throughout this journey is going to make them better and understand the difference between widgets, and also, the difference in value and price and what you really are getting out of that. Trade publications will help point you to different folks that you can invite to provide you information and quotes and that kind of stuff. Word of mouth, like I said, certainly is a big part of that. And then brokers, where you're buying solutions, brokers are very much like hiring a real estate agent when you're looking for a house. They go through all of the solutions out there and they bring some to the table that they think are going to be good for you. The brokers are generally paid by the solution providers and not by you. So it's a great way to get sort of free IT help. And normally, brokers, like we're up front, if there's an extra special pricing from one or the other, we always communicate that through to our end users just because we want to be transparent. But again, it's a way to get that technical expertise without necessarily having to buy it. And they know about a lot of companies that you don't know about. So we have probably 300 companies, I guess, under the portfolio that we certainly work with, which covers, the gamut of everything from unified communications, contact center, cloud, all that kind of good stuff. So employees, like I said, employees are a great way to find information, but sometimes employees hit the easy button. And, that helps to build a journey along with a certain vendor and manufacturer, but that doesn't always keep those vendors and manufacturers honest. And certifications definitely become part of that. A lot of vendor companies use those certifications as a way to build loyalty amongst their customer base. That's not to say that it's wrong, but certainly as we go down this journey and ask, That's one of those things that should be included. Any of that knowledge transfer information should be part of what we expect from our vendors so that we're not continuously reliant on them. Years ago, I worked with this company that had a consultant, and that was sort of his end of the company. And assuring that he never left was he was the only one that knew anything. And there was a whole IT department that really benefited from being cross-trained and learning from other things in the department. And he ended up working his way out of a job because of that. But certainly we expect that from our vendors and being able to, to get that information. And also understanding that vendor assistance can be a limiting factor. And that's part of this easy button. If you're working on a spec and your vendor hands you a spec that you can cut and paste into a document, there's benefits to that, and that it does hit that easy button. But there's also problems to that, because each vendor, normally there's going to be something in there that's vendor specific. So there's no or equal to really do that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too. And that also, if you keep hitting that easy button, you might not realize there's other things out there that can provide significant benefits and be really cool technology that you want to take advantage of, because you just get stuck in that always buying the same brand. It's like always buying the same brand of ketchup. There might be a better ketchup out there, but you don't know because you always buy the same brand of ketchup. And in some cases we wing it because we're really in reactionary mode and we just have to throw something in. And again, I encourage you on the solution side, find a broker, talk to people. Everybody will give you a free phone conversation and just help you sort of understand what your needs are, if they can help you or not. So from a supplier relationship management, understand that some suppliers are really great after the sale. Some suppliers are really great before the sale, and then you never hear from them again. And I hear this all the time. We bought this product. It was a great product. We haven't heard from those guys in 3 years. If you're doing business with somebody and you're bringing them on as a supplier, you really want to make sure that they become a business partner and not just a parts vendor. Anybody can sell you parts, and that's not where you're going to get the most bang for your buck from a business perspective. Also, vendor lock-in can be very dangerous. Like I said, if good example, smart cities, there's a lot of technology that builds on top of a geographical information system. The problem is once you start building all those products, you're locked into that geographical information system. So we have open systems, and then we have systems that are locked. And every vendor, especially in the data center space now, kind of wants to be everything that you do in that space to the exclusion of all else. And then if there's a problem with that vendor and their supply chain, that sort of leaves you vulnerable. If there's a cybersecurity issue with that vendor and you have no other vendor as a backup, that can also be an issue. So there's vendor scorecards out there. I have one I'm happy to share with anybody that wants it. My contact information will be at the end. And it's a good start. It's not going to be everything for your project, but at least get you started. RFI cycles are requests for information. We don't do enough of these anymore. In IT, we've really kind of gotten away from that practice, but it's the best thing that you can do. It gets you that time to really sit down with your vendors, look at solutions, and we'll talk a little bit more about that too as we move forward. Short deadlines are your enemy. If you have to have something right away and you don't have time to plan, you don't have time really to give yourself that strategic information planning time, then you're shooting yourselves in the foot. That's not to say that you won't get a solution, but it will say that you won't know the depth and breadth of other solutions. And it might even mean that since you're on such a short time frame that you have to change vendors because you haven't allowed the vendor that you're working with enough time to give you that logistic strategy, for instance. And IT solutions are becoming more and more complex. They're not becoming easier. It's not just go buy one thing and it does it all. And we have to look at really everything as an ecosystem and how all of those things fit together, from one software package to another, for instance, or how it's going to interface with a new product that's coming along in 6 months. Maybe this is the time to consider that as opposed to waiting until we implement that product in 6 months. And then all of the available products and options that you can have. Sometimes vendors have an option, you just don't know to ask for it. And if you don't do this RFI cycle, you don't know it exists. So, it might be a very easy thing to put in there. And like I said, vendors are going to push the latest and greatest because they're incentivized by their companies. That's how their sales strategies work. That's how their commission plans work. But that doesn't always mean that it's going to be the best for you. Great example. I was working with an end user, and in their particular data center, this company was pushing top of rack switching and was going to put a switch in the top of every cabinet across all of the cabinets in the data center. It was about $33 million worth of equipment. But they had a very low density data center, so they wouldn't have been able to fill in all those switches and use all of those switch ports anyway. And just by moving those switches to the end of a row, and as opposed to in the top of every cabinet, we were able to get the cost of that equipment down to about $5 million, which saved them not only on the capital cost of the equipment to start with, but also, the SmartNet the maintenance that they had to pay on that equipment, the power consumption that would go from eliminating all of those switches. And so there was really tangible benefits outside of the initial operating cost. And that's where I think it's important to really sort of challenge those people and make sure, not every solution works in every environment, and not every environment is good for every solution. So you really want to be able to do that. And so when we talk about consultants definitely can provide some benefit to us and some solutions to us, but we also have to realize that they may have a sphere of influence in what they do. And by saying that, what I mean is that a lot of rebates exist, a lot of incentives exist to work with certain ones. And sometimes you'll find that in order to be a vendor with this, or a consultant with this particular vendor, you have to carry a quota, and you have to say, I'm going to sell X amount of dollars of your product every year. And then in return, you're going to provide me leads for those services or whatever. That's not to say that that's a bad thing, but I also think that it's really, as a consumer, as an end user, you should know those things, and you should, because they might not be bringing other products to the table that would be really great in your environment because they have those quotas. And so understanding that sphere of influence is really, really important. The consultants that are out there that list a certain manufacturer specifications, for instance, and then put an or equal, that very much can be viewed as lip service. And I'll talk a little bit more about that too. And in a lot of cases, they're just cutting and pasting something that a manufacturer has presented to them as a solution, said, here's my spec. You can use them as cut and paste. It's their easy button, right, to make that solution happen much faster. But that doesn't mean that you're necessarily getting the best. And so you want to be able to vet that out. So disinterested third parties, like I said, these are great consulting agreements to have with folks, because they sign an agreement up front that they're not going to have any financial interest in any of those solutions that they bring to the table. If they do, if they're working for, on the brokerage side, for instance, I think that it's only fair that they disclose if they're getting paid more for one than they are for another, so that if there's any bias there that brings that to the table. And certainly, as you start building that information, they can provide that quality feedback. And in a lot of cases, knowing all of those additional companies that can provide a solution, they can start working through what you have and what your needs are in relation to what can be provided. And in some cases, they can even recommend things that you never even thought of that would be really great to bring to the table. They also have worked with other companies in your exact situation or very close to your situation. And so sometimes they know things that were problems for other companies, and they can bring that experience to the table and help you work through those issues before they become issues for you. So that foresight and planning into projects can be really valuable. Brokers, like I said, are not vendor driven. We have so many vendors we can choose from. And certainly if you choose to use a different vendor, brokers don't care about that either. But it's very much like buying a house. You get an owner's agent that is going to sort out all of the possibilities, find the right number of bedrooms, the right number of bathrooms, whether you want a pool or not a pool, whatever that is. But the same thing on the technology side. And it does save you the consulting fees. It allows you to bring somebody forward that can really act as your advocate with all of these. They can schedule up demos. They can help you with your RFI documents and really having clear statements of need, which is so critical. Just to give you an idea on the solution side, this could be cloud compute, it could be managed services, so desktop as a service, IT as a service, disaster recovery, business continuity, managed services, all of your telecommunications stuff from your actual fiber lines coming into your building all the way through video conferencing solutions, anything that you do in the cloud or anything as a service in the cloud, security as a service, making sure that you have physical security assessments, unified threat assessments for anything that could happen on the cybersecurity side, penetration testing to make sure that your security solution is actually working, software-defined wide area networking that can be complemented with security. And right now, certainly through COVID, we've seen an uptick in people wanting to make sure that not only are there employees that are working remotely, not only do they have the the actual circuit they need, but making sure that it's secure and all of the information that goes across that is secure. And then again, all the way down to the data center side. If you're going to do a modular data center on site, if you want to build one of those and then have it taken over, so you're really building your own co-location facility, but you're the sole tenant, that can be done. A lot of those kind of things that you might not have thought about. Software-defined power from an energy conservation standpoint, and even construction management solutions. If you're going to build a building or you're working towards a construction project, something that'll carry you all the way through. And I'll show you a couple advantages of some of those kind of things that you may not necessarily have thought of. I love this quote. It's Benjamin Franklin's: "The bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of low price is forgotten." And we all have been in that where, the cheapest is not the best. And certainly we've seen that. And that's where you start seeing a lot of sole source and sole spec contracts, because they know that a certain manufacturer has taken really good care of them. And there's not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but I think every once in a while, it's not a bad idea just to entertain some other thoughts and keep folks honest. But really, what we want to make sure is that we come up with a scorecard that is going to provide a benefit for people that provide cost-saving solutions, alternative solutions. That switching scenario was a good one. Instead of just saying, okay, we only want top of rack, give us a solution that could save us money. Save to 25 million bucks, but you have to encourage those options. If you don't specifically list that out as an encouragement, you're not going to get those. And so this really is where you start taking care of your own pocketbook. It's also a great place where procurement can start helping you out and bringing in some of that language for you. And after you've done a few of these projects, your procurement team is going to get much better working with you for the solutions that you need. And then we want to understand the supply chain. And we need to realize nobody works for free. You don't work for free. Neither do any of your suppliers or distributors. As far as that goes, they get paid to have products on the shelf. Sometimes they get paid rebates by churning over stuff. So if you go ask this distributor for product A, they might push you towards product B because they get rebates there. There might be things that sort of sway that. And the idea is, if you get to price several options, you'll start seeing some of those. And you might want to price several distributors. You might want to price several different manufacturers and just see how that sorts out. So if you have somebody, for instance, that we'll pick on cable plant that installs cable plant, there's a lot of manufacturers of cabling, and understanding that it is very commodity based. There's a standard behind that backs you. So really, technically, any standardized cabling should work with the product and solution that you're doing, provided you're following the standards. Now, there's nuances and other things that you might find beneficial, but once you start pricing those out, you can find out if somebody is really just selling on a name brand or they're selling on an actual benefit and feature. And we'll talk more about that too. But understand too that there's no one size fits all. And really, when you start through the RFI process, even if you don't buy directly from a certain manufacturer, you don't buy directly from a certain widget company, it still helps to be able to work with those manufacturers and find out what all of those forms and features are, because the companies that sell those products might not be aware of the latest and greatest or see what those different strategies are. And going back to that top of rack, for example, the company itself, they weren't real happy about their bill of material getting cut by $25 million, but the local guys were really happy because now they figured out a way that they could go into other companies that didn't have a refresh budget and be able to sell them a solution to get them the latest technology at a more affordable price point. And so all of those different things come into play, and understand there's no one size fits all. If a manufacturer or a company sells you, this is going to be what you save using this solution over all other solutions, understand that's only a savings if that applies to you, right? It's not a savings if you never are going to have that solution to start with. And most manufacturers try to come up with good key points that consolidate a lot of things in a lot of different environments. It's really on you to pick and choose which ones are applicable to you. And again, we have to understand that rebates and relationships exist. If you spend $2 million on a project and somebody is going to get a $20,000 rebate off of that, that really should go towards the cost of your project, in my mind. And it may be that you're okay with whoever's doing the installation keeping that, or a distributor keeping that, or whatever, but certainly your price should reflect any pricing incentives that come through from a manufacturer or from somebody else. Now, here's the or equal that I talked about that I think you really need to be aware of from a lip service perspective. If I say that I want to buy a laptop, and I list a whole bunch of specifications for a certain manufacturer's laptop, and then I put or equal, there's probably going to be things in those specifications, especially if I got it from that vendor, that nobody has an or equal for. It'll be some little something. I've seen things where it's a PAL color scheme and it has to be this particular PAL color. Does one shade different really alter the performance? No. So aesthetically, that might be important to you, but if another one is a shade off and it's half the price with the exact same functionality, you won't know about that, because whoever is supplying those original solutions understands what that original specification, what manufacturer that's written around. And so they're not going to give you an or equal unless you say, here's extra points for providing a more cost-effective solution with the exact same functionality. And you have to understand which features and which pieces of features really provide a benefit. They really provide something tangible that's going to work for you. And in some cases, just putting or equal, procurement does it too. They perceive that's an equalizer, and that gives people to give alternate solutions. But if you ask for pink bubble gum or equal, the perception in everybody's mind is that, yeah, you really want pink bubble gum. And so they're not going to bring that to the table. And so when we make an ask, we want to be careful how we ask for things. We want to ask for the exact tangibles of something that we have, and then we want to encourage options, because this starts that learning cycle. Company B would like to find the product or services necessary to deliver what? And then now we've listed something very specific. There's a tangible we want out of there, but then we also know that we can ask for pieces and parts and options to go along with that would provide some benefit with that same solution. And encouraging those options is really where you get to see the neat stuff. Be very aware of marketing speak. New and improved, first to market. Does that honestly really matter? Honestly, in a lot of cases, last to market is going to be the best solution, because they will have done their research and they will have sussed out everything everybody hates about the other solutions that came to market before them. So those markety speaky things, I think you need to be very careful of those. And if they can't articulate that is an actual tangible feature, then forget it. And then you see things like, the largest online trade show. You don't know that because you don't know what the makeup is of every other online trade show that there is. And so that really, it's subliminal, but it's so non-tangible. So be really careful of those. And every marketing department does that. And here's a great example, right? If I'm writing an RFP to purchase a car, and my vendor gives me a spec and says, for every car I purchase, there must be 260 miles an hour on the speedometer. I have just knocked out 95% of the cars on the market, I'm guessing. But definitely a lot of them. Now, if I'm really only going to go 75, maybe 80 miles an hour, and I say it has to have 140 miles an hour on the speedometer, I've just added back probably that same 95% as options here. But this car manufacturer is not going to want you to do that. This car manufacturer wants to put that in the spec for 260 to say that because now he's just sealed out most of his competition and taken them out of the equation. But you have to understand the environment, right? You're not going to have that same specification if you live on a gravel road and expect that car to drive on a gravel road, because you'll never do 260. So realistically, we have to figure out the features we need for the environment that we live in. And, we have to be careful with selective text too. If your kid comes to you and says, "Mom, can I have a bowl of ice cream?" Their definition of a bowl of ice cream and your definition of a bowl of ice cream might be exponentially different. And so when we see things like lower cost per port, you have to evaluate the whole ecosystem. It might be a lower cost per port on this switch, but if I have to put a networking card and a server that is significantly higher cost, then balance of the whole ecosystem, I'm upside down. I haven't really saved anything. There was years ago a problem with one of the end users I was working with. They had a consultant that would save them. They got paid a rebate at the end of the year contract, their procurement contract, if they saved X number of dollars in procurement. The problem is that they were going out and buying cheap stuff, and they found out their power bill was going through the roof because it was literally on laptops all the way through the entire office building, and they weren't looking at other things. So make sure that that whole ecosystem is part of what you're looking at. If you're looking for things that are important, like standards-based stuff or interoperability, see if it's independently verified. But you also have to understand there's a cost to that independent verification. And in most cases, if a product is tested for interoperability, it'll be just one iteration of the project. So it might be a 6-port Ethernet switch as opposed to a 24-port, a 48-port, because you have to pay for each one of those iterations from an interoperability perspective. And the cost of doing that normally is, could be anywhere, $25,000 per. If you're looking at a server or Ethernet, that's where the standards come into play. And in some cases, you'll find manufacturers that self-certify. So we're Ethernet compliant, we're 802.3 compliant. And, it's important to make sure that somebody is completely compliant with a standard, and that's your assurance that'll be interoperable with other solutions that you bring into that same environment. And there's also, when we do adhere to standards, that compliancy means that you are compliant with each and every piece of that standard. There's also things that are compatible, which means they meet part of that and they'll work with a standard for part of that, but not with other parts of it. And that might be okay for you. It might solve your solution, but just understand that there's a difference between compliant and compatible. And sometimes you need to live outside the standard for your environment. Sometimes there's a solution that solves a particular need that you have. Sometimes you might want to work with a system that's completely proprietary, but it absolutely fixes everything you need. That's also cool. But it's just important, and through this RFI process, if we're really addressing protocols or standards, to understand what those are, because once you get outside of that, sometimes those workarounds can be very expensive. And keep in mind, like I said, there's no island unto itself. Everything that we do in our IT is a piece of an ecosystem. We have security that is an overlay on top of all of our data and our systems. We have systems that have power requirements and cooling requirements. We have buildings and facilities that we have to address power and cooling requirements within and what those limitations are. And all of this in IT is an ecosystem. And as we procure things in IT and we work through these different solutions, we have to make sure that no one solution is going to have an adverse impact on another solution. For instance, years ago when Blade Centers came out, I was working with one end user and the server team brought a whole bunch of Blade servers and never told the facility side, only to find out that there was no way that they could cool those. So then there was a great big unbudgeted expense to go in and have to add in supplemental cooling for those Blade servers. So those are the kind of things that we talk about. There's one company that bought a whole bunch of new network switches and didn't realize that also meant they were going to have to change out the server cards in every single server throughout the entire data center. Big unbudgeted expense. And once it's contractually, bound, those guys, well, you said you were going to buy these switches, you bought these switches. I'm sorry you didn't consider your servers, but gee, Mr. Customer, that's not my problem. And those kind of things happen. So keep in mind that all of these ecosystem things really, really matter. And so this is really part of that power of the RFI. We get to find out about all of the solutions. We get to find out about all of the different forms and features that are available to us. We get to do some long-term business strategy planning based on the information that we have from the RFI. We get to do vendor interviews and we get to vet those vendors. We get to figure out supply chain and how the pricing works. And in some cases, it's in your best interest to get direct pricing from the manufacturer and then shop whoever's going to stock it and buy it backwards, because then you know what your price is and you can start figuring out their market and markup, and understand, people have to have markup if they're going to touch a product, because that's how they make a living. But you don't want to, you don't want to have pricing from a manufacturer and a manufacturer gives you a great big discount and then somebody else just sucks up that discount along the way and puts that in their profit pocket as opposed to your pocket because you were smart enough to negotiate something with a manufacturer. And so all of this becomes part of this RFI. And when we start this request for information process and we bring procurement in, procurement now starts to learn and they start to figure out as they sit in the vendor interview meetings and they work with the different departments that are going to be a part of this solution and use this solution. Now they start building this knowledge base of things that they need. And it also helps at the end where I've seen in a lot of cases, a company decides on a technology, and when procurement goes out there and tries to procure it and then figure out an or equal, it's not really an equal, but they don't really understand the intricacies or why it's not an or equal. And so this, just having them part of this process kind of brings them along and helps them to understand that value versus price and how those things are impacted by those decisions. And then same thing with the supply chain, if we're looking with a supply chain, we want to figure out who, where, and how it's manufactured. Right now, today, there's a big push for Made in America, especially with government contracts. So we can ask these things in the RFI process before we go out to quote and decide that's a great quote and realize it's not what we wanted. And then, so, also working with rebates, working with logistics, working with what their stocking is and how that works, and really making them put in paper, in writing, what they're going to do to support you. And from an interoperability testing, in some cases you'll find manufacturers, they'll provide you with sample product you can test and play with, either to keep or, to use. And then you get to start really seeing things in a different light because you're giving yourself that ability, that time to evaluate not just the product, but also the supply chain and how it's going to get from wherever it starts into your hand. You'll get to figure out if you have a software that you're implementing and there's 5 consultants that can all do this implementation, you can figure out how they work. And you can also ask for some other cool things too, which comes along the way. And we'll talk about that too in a second. Then we want to do vendor interviews. And this is where you bring in not just a salesperson from the vendor, you bring the salesperson from the vendor and somebody technical. You can do that obviously through remote stuff nowadays, or bring them in themselves. Have them walk through a demo, find out if things work. Years ago, I wrote this software package and one of the salespeople at the company went and told an end user, oh yeah, you can use this package. We can change this numeric field to an alphanumeric field, no problem. Big problem. It was a key field and it would have meant rewriting the whole software package. And so that's why you really want to make sure that you've got a balance between the technical folks that are actually get the technology inside out and the salespeople who, may be just learning the technology as they go. And it may be there's differences that they didn't read the memo that day. And so this kind of gets you that whole influence in there. And figure out alternatives. You might find when you get to the technical folks that as you say, I don't just love this feature. They might have one in the works, especially if you're working with the product folks that is 6 months out. And maybe you decide to wait that 6 months. Or maybe if you're a good enough customer, they say, hey, we could push that forward and get that to you earlier to become part of this project. And so this is that whole, before we sign on the dotted line, we really get to suss out those solutions. And then again, we want to figure out the sphere of influence. Who touches this product? How much are you getting paid or incentivized to source this? You even see this down to engineering. There are some engineers that design the same exact building all the time, the same data center all the time, because some vendor has made it very easy for them by providing them specs. They know what the stuff does. They don't have to learn anything new. Certainly those are not the engineering firms that you want if you're engineering a building, but these are where you get to ask those things. You know, how many buildings have you done? How many vendor products do you incorporate in your design? And now you can start seeing some of these spheres of influence. And in some cases, vendors pay engineers to specify products. And if that's the case, you know, that happens, but you shouldn't be stuck with a product you don't particularly want just because they're getting paid by you and paid by somebody else to spec that product. And also figuring out too, back to this point, making sure if somebody says something is equal, that it is in fact equal. And so there are always times when companies have things that go above and beyond a standard. That's great if they can do that. Is that something you're going to use? Is it tangible to you? Does it matter? If not, then, you know, we don't really care about that extra, because the or equal we want is that it's all standards compliant. And in that case, everything's equal, right? So then it becomes features and duties and parts beyond that. And then also understanding that there is a life cycle management. So right now we're at this inception stage. We've decided that we need a product to perform or do X. And we're at this request for information, and we're going out to companies and we're having them come back and tell us what all they have. And then we want to understand what that expected life cycle is. If you buy something that has a 5-year life cycle or something that has a 3-year life cycle, that has budget implications down the line. We want to know, how many times do I have to touch this? How many times do I have to patch it? How many times does it have to be upgraded? What are the change management things? Can I do additional installations and still be covered under warranty? Or do I have to go back to somebody that's certified to do that installation? All of those things are things that we want to consider. And then we want to decide, you know, what if we want to change out of that solution? What if we want to leave this solution and do something else? If I put my data in your cloud, how hard is it going to be for me to get my data out of your cloud? Those are the kind of things, you know, what if we don't want to use this anymore? How do I map all of my data out of this certain database and get it to a different database? Cloud's a great example. It's nothing to put your data up in a cloud. It's expensive to get your data out of a cloud. And so you'll notice with these, you know, if you're bringing a lot of data out of a cloud, if it's above 500 terabytes, they're like, hey, just call us. And so figuring out these little intricacies of what goes in, what goes out, maybe you decide that a lot of that data doesn't really need to be in the cloud because it's going to cost you too much money. So the data that's really transactional, that you don't really have long-term storage, maybe you decide that you want to put that in a different place. And now as we're going through the RFI with a customer, we say, okay, well, we don't necessarily want all of this data in the cloud. This stuff that's transactional that we don't really have a requirement to keep, we're going to process it here. And now we're going to do a hybrid environment where some is there, some is here. And we can start really mapping these things out strategically. And then you also want to look at very specific things for your project. It's one thing to sit in Jackson, Mississippi and decide that you're going to use product X in California. But if there's no local support for product X in California, you're shipping in labor. And so the costs for that are significantly different. So we want to know in that environment what's going to exist at that location. Then the biggest thing that companies forget to ask, and the biggest thing you really should always, 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 always ask when you go into any kind of an agreement is, what do you need from me? What do you need from me so that I can be the best customer you ever had? What are my requirements? What's going to be required labor-wise from us? What's going to be required data-wise from us? What's going to be required space-wise? What's going to be required power-wise? Whatever that solution is, what do you need from us? I've seen so many projects over the years go into a terrible overage because somebody forgot to ask and the vendor assumed, or somebody assumed that that talent or that whatever would be there, and then it wasn't. And so then there's, all these unbudgeted costs that fall into play. And then we want to figure out time constraints. How much time is it going to require from us? How much time are you going to need? And what is your escalation procedure? You always want to know that. I'm just going to tell you, there's no such thing as a project that goes on without a hitch. It's so rare. Just plan on it not happening. And so what's the escalation procedure if that happens? Where do I go when the local guy can't handle it? How do I get to the president of the company? How do I get, if it's a very big company, do they have 3 tiers of tech support, for instance? Or do you just get somebody halfway around the world at a certain period of time? What if you need tech support at 11 o'clock at night? Do they only have it 8 to 5? And then procurement, very specific. You have to understand that nobody's an expert at anything, and that is absolutely going to include your procurement team, and people hate change. And so a lot of times you'll find procurement organizations really try to challenge IT department to look at other things as opposed to sole source. And there's certainly reasons where some things are sole source, but you have to be able to justify that decision. I used to have a customer, his deal was the 5 whys. Anytime his team was going to procure anything, they had to answer the 5 whys. Why are you going back to this vendor? Because we've always used them. No. That's not a tangible. Why are we going back to this vendor? Because so-and-so, we had an issue and we had a short time frame. They absolutely stepped up to the table. They had all of our product there before the project started. They really helped us out on logistics. That's a tangible. So those kind of things start coming into play. And this is from Dartmouth. It's the 7 steps of decision making. 1, you have to identify the decision, which we talked about. So that's the RFI. We gather that information. Then we identify alternatives. And in a lot of cases, when you start this RFI cycle, you might go back to a second RFI cycle because you found enough that's really, really cool. You want to do something different. Weigh the different evidence, choose amongst the alternatives. And from there, then maybe you go to the RFQ and then review your decision. And you may go back. I've seen a few cases where people got their quotes back and decided it just didn't do what they wanted to do. So they started the cycle all over again, or they started the whole quote cycle all over again just to be able to get what they want. So make sure that you give yourself that time to be agile so you don't get up to number 7 and then you're stuck realizing that you have buyer's remorse and things did not go well. So all of our steps for success, we're going to do this RFI first. We're going to try to be open so that we're open to options. We definitely want to encourage options. We want to give extra points. We want to call out there are extra points for options. We're going to do vendor interviews. We're going to, ask vendors how they compare to other vendors. If you get a vendor that sells their product by negatively selling against another product, that should speak volumes to you. I hate that. How do they go to market? Can they help you with direct pricing? And then you could, of course, ask independents to help you. And then for round 2, once we go to the bid cycle and we get to the RFQ cycle, now we can be more specific. If there's certain features that we have determined in an RFI cycle that are absolutely have to have, then we could put that in the RFQ. If there's some that are nice to have, or there's other things that are options, that we can list those out and encourage options too. Because in some cases between the RFI cycle and the RFQ cycle, new options might be available that you don't know about. So you can always ask that. But we want to be specific enough, like company expects to purchase a cable plant to upgrade the facility at whatever, and list what you expect from that. Company expects to purchase in-row cooling units to increase compute capacity from X kilowatts per cabinet to how many kilowatts per cabinet. Now, we haven't really gone down the line of throwing in exact specifications because we want to see what those specifications want to come back. And we also want to make sure that we don't give that perception that we want to sole source something. And so the clear expectations are really what we want to state. And then, if we do have something that we need to hard specify for a reason, absolutely hard specify that, but make sure that we're not hard specifying only to knock another vendor out because some vendor has made that very easy from us by giving us specifications. And in some cases, like I said, this could be iterative. You might have multiple stages of this, especially on bigger projects. There's lots of examples online, certainly, for how to write these. Procurement's going to have some. You can get those from other companies. This is just one screenshot of a Google search, but you can find those everywhere. And you'll also find consultants and even brokers that'll help you write those RFIs. We do that. And then find out about the vendor company. How long have they been in business is one of the first questions that seems to come up, but it's not always the most important. There's a lot of companies that are out there that have years and years and years and years of experience. They've just spun off and decided they didn't want to work for a different company anymore. So figuring out the principals, who you're dealing with, how long they've been in business definitely helps. I mean, I just started this company in August, but I've got 40 years of experience in the industry. So if somebody looked at just how long my company's been in business, it would be a very different picture. For products, how long have they been around? There's nothing wrong with being on the leading edge, and sometimes even the bleeding edge. If it's something really cool and there's something that's something's going to help you out. Software-defined power is a really great example. It's something very new that's come along. It's probably the coolest thing that's come along from a sustainability perspective in a long time, but it's a new technology. And so somebody's got to step in and, rip off the Band-Aid and use it. And that company is going to have amazing, amazing benefits. References. Ask for references, but be prepared to find your own. And I will say, I have actually, when I was on the end user side, had companies that supplied references that I called that had nothing good to say about that company. It's rare, but it does happen. But my favorite trick is to go out to a company's website, look at their old press releases, and find where they have done press releases for somebody to put in a product, and then go talk to those companies, or go to one of the networking events, that you have through a trade association or something, and suss out some peers that have worked with that product and ask how their experience went. Because realistically, people should just give you good references. How do they go to market, what your local support structure is, hours of support, escalation procedures, how they're going to do knowledge transfer and make sure your folks are trained, interoperability with things in your own ecosystem, standards and codes, do they comply? Are there anything specific, that you need? For instance, in California, there's very different standards and codes than there are in other parts of the United States. And you want to make sure if you're going to, if this is going to be your company's standard solution, that it's going to work in all of the environments that you support. And then anything unique that's required for the rollout. Again, how do I be your best customer? Now, this is another cool thing that you can usually get throughout the RFI and the RFQ process, and that's to ask for a sample project plan. Now, it's not going to be all-inclusive, obviously, because they haven't walked your site in many cases or don't know 100% what your project is. But man, what a shortcut that is to try to figure out what that timeline is going to look like. And honestly, from a planning perspective, it might eliminate one vendor if you find out that their project cycle and their implementation cycle is just way out of whack. You can either go back and try to negotiate that with them, but this is super helpful to you. It's also a good time to ask for business continuity plans. What do I need from if this goes down? What is this going to do? What's the business impact going to be if this unit fails? What do I need to put in place to make sure that I can back this up, or I have a supplement, or where do I go? You can find out all of this cool information now in this RFQ process. And by now, since you've worked with the vendors through the RFI process, most of these vendors feel like they have at least a pretty decent shot of earning your business, and they're really, really helpful in trying to help you figure that out. And ask about rebates and incentive programs. Find out if they're yours, if they go to the installer, or what that looks like. Some manufacturers will give the rebate directly to the end user, but you won't know if you don't ask. And then figure out your maintenance requirements, moves, adds, and changes, what it does to warranty. And again, here, this is where you ask about disaster recovery. If you're in a specific environment, like where there's hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, high altitude, extreme heat, like in Arizona, find out, if there's any specifics required to that environment. And if this was your money, how would you maximize your savings? I always encourage that you put this statement in any of your RFQ documents, because people will come back and they will amaze you. In some cases, it'll be, well, I would use this product, but I would use it in this way, or I would use this product instead because it provides the same functionality at a lower cost. And they'll help you figure that out. Now, there are some companies that only want to sell you the most biggest, and that they want to hit their quotas and their big numbers. But companies that want your repeat business will absolutely come up with a solution to help you out here. And again, we want to figure out, get that project plan before the project starts. We're offloading that workload onto them. We're helping, they can help us figure out the documentation, and it helps us do things like this is a construction management package called My Smart Plans. And this really starts at the drawing stage. And it came from a blueprint company, actually. They got tired of chasing down blueprints. And their deal is they handle all of the documents and making sure that all the documents in our play, and they highlight any changes that happen to the documents and the change orders, and they put in all of the meeting minutes, which is great when 6 months from now you forgot what was talked about 6 months ago. And all of this stays in this rolling documentation throughout the entire project. And then it even goes so far as when it's done, they can go in and scan in all of the user documents, and now you just click on a piece of equipment and the whole user's manual is there, or whatever pieces of information. It might be preventive maintenance. It might be other things, that carry forward. So these are the kind of out of the box thinking that you probably wouldn't have thought of if you were going to do something. This is another one. This is a company that was looking at co-location space, but they had a lot of that data that really didn't need to, go on a long communication line. But the problem was that their data center was sort of old and antiquated, and it needed an update. And so instead of actually moving all that data, we found a modular data center manufacturer that would build it on site for them. They took over the management, leased it back to them, where it was just like a co-location. And so it became co-location on premise. They got to keep their IT department. They didn't have to worry about hiring intelligent hands halfway across the US. And it was in a place where there wasn't other colo options. And so they ended up saving a huge ton of money. And then they turned around and built another one on site that they could turn into, they use that same colo, but now they actually started getting that as a revenue generating piece of the building. So those are some of the solutions that maybe you didn't think about, but they could come to the table when you start working with other folks. And most of the contracts, when you work with somebody external, if you're doing it as a broker, it's, free. If you're doing it as a consultant, they're very inexpensive, and they really help kind of augment what you're doing. And in most cases, they'll save you more than they cost. Definitely in most cases. So in summary, use your vendors as information, but use yourself as a solution. Remember, procurement can help you, but you have to arm them with facts. You need to bring them up through this process. It's really hard to be reactionary at the end of a process. It's very easy, if you're part of that process, to add value throughout that process. If you have solidified vendors, make sure they're bringing solutions to the table and challenge them. If you've always done business with vendor A, I will tell you, if they're the sole vendor that you have, the price is going to creep up with what they offer you. You're not going to be getting discounts because there's nothing to sort of keep them honest in that equation. And I see this a lot in large companies that have specific vendors on the list. They enjoy that position of loyalty. Now, if you're getting business value for that, it probably doesn't matter because you're getting something for that money. But if you're paying more because that vendor is your specified solution and you never see the people and you get no benefit out of that, it's time to do an RFQ and open that spec up to other vendors and just keep them honest and figure out if you're really getting the bang that you expect for your buck. And then again, make sure that you use those disinterested third parties whenever you can. And RFIs are absolutely your friend, and don't settle for something. If you put out the RFI and you go through that cycle and you're not getting exactly what you want, there's other places to look. You can always do a second cycle before you go out to RFQ. So here's all my contact information. I am happy to answer any questions that you have at the end of this video. And you can certainly reach out to me by email. You can connect on LinkedIn, or there's my Twitter feed, any of those. Hopefully our paths cross again in the near future. Thank you for your time and attention. I hope you guys have a great day.